quote unquote taking the credit.
Welcome. Hey, you too.
Yeah, what's up?
Welcome. Sorry.
No, it's all good. We all good. I just wanted to make sure I didn't. Maybe it was my computer.
No, it was me. I forgot.
Okay, but I tell you what, though, I'm not gonna go. I should have gotten a computer a couple of months ago because I'm loving hooray to China. China's not playing. Anyway, so if you like Apple products, you better get them. Well, it's too late. But anyway, the point is this.
I think we should go, Dr. Carr, back to the flip phone. Back to what we were, we were talking about the science.
The one with the cord in the wall. With if you ain't at home, they can't catch you.
How about we go back to dialing, each other? We're talking.
You can go back to dialing.
Let's go back to hello. If I'm not home, then the phone's not getting answered. How about we get back to that? I'm not home.
I left this device.
It's an answer machine.
I was halfway to campus the other day where I realized I left this device at the house, and I was so happy.
You left your phone at home?
Oh yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Sometimes I do it on purpose, but other times I forgot, and then it's beautiful because immediately I can think differently. It's immediate because it is. This is a phone is an electronic morphine. It's a morphine drip. That's all it is in that respect. I mean, you're like, okay, I'm not going. Okay, let me. Oh, it's more. You keep hitting that button. Leave it at home. You ain't got your morphine. There's a moment, maybe a withdrawal, and after that, your nervous system takes over. And I go back to reading the paper. And I'm not going to interrupt reading the paper to see if there's an update on the article I'm reading physically. Oh, let me check. Nope. No, I don't need that. I can check. I got a computer in my bag, and I'll get where I'm going in a minute. But I don't need that phone. Meanwhile, the buzzers are gone. Well, anybody calls me knows it goes straight to voicemail. I don't have it's off. So you got to text me. But even then, the texts are hardwired. But, China's going to help with that because, the iPhones are already several $100s up. Even as Apple lost a quarter.
Let me just say this. In processing this, I've been having this conversation for a while. Ryan Clark, sports podcaster, former athlete, I've been playing this clip for the last couple of days on my radio show about, how he was like, back in the day, you had to call up and ask for Charlene, Miss Johnson and Charlene home, and you had to practice in front of the mirror to make sure, you could get your game tight, and then your boys would help you. And, there was a whole community around dating and, just actually having to talk to an adult to get to the, and I was sad that this generation will never know what that is. But even that kind of, community gathering around the young people to figure out how to get them together. But there's a larger thing with what you're talking about with the phone and how, that dopamine drip, as you meant, that morphine drip.
Or dopamine, whatever, the drug. Yes, the drug.
Yeah. I mean, but it's doing something to the nervous system that I don't know if I think it's reversible, but it requires something of us, right? But as we're talking about this iPhone probably is going to cost a couple $1,000s. People who don't have money will find a way to buy the thing because we're addicted. Folks who are addicted will sell their mama's wedding ring to buy that next hit. This is that. So I'm not at all encouraged that no matter what the price is, that people won't find a way, if it even means in this book, The Signs of Evil, talks about Nairobi and the poverty there and how this woman was walking in the market and a man cut off her finger because she had a ring on it that he could sell to get money. And he wasn't thinking about the harm he was committing against that woman's body as much as he was, there's a ring. I'm going to take her ring. And he cut off her finger to get it. This is my concern, right? Because it doesn't take long for people to devolve into savagery. And if you already are starting with a lack of humanity, I don't know where this goes. So I'm just sounding the alarm, Dr. Carr.
Yeah, I think it's important. We have to sound the alarm. I think and to find solutions requires a difficult choice. How do we, again, Jonathan Hart, now over a year ago, a couple of years now, stolen focus. How do we retain our focus? Anytime I see a narrative, whether it be in book, film, audio, that flattens, I use Thomas Friedman's language from The World is Flat, that flattens distinctions, cultural distinctions, I reject it immediately. and then begin mining the narrative for useful information. What do I mean by that? Any narrative that flattens cultural distinctions is trying to hide something, or it's just lazy, sloppy, or inattentive narration. So, for example, and we'll talk about this in a minute, because I was looking for the etymology of the word tariff earlier in the week, wanted to talk about it with students. So I started at the Oxford English Dictionary right over there in the house. And I'm going through with my little magnifying glass, because if you did it just on the unabridged version that was just restricted to the large print, then it would fill up that whole, it's like 30 volumes, but the smaller one's 2 volumes, but it's like 3 pages on each volume. So you got to take the magnifying glass. I'm on each page. So I'm looking and I'm looking for the etymology, and it disappears. Once you get out of the old French and the old English, it begins to disappear. And I said, okay, this is not going to be. So now I got to look somewhere else. And typically the Oxford English Dictionary is going to have from the Latin, from the Greek, and it's going to come through the later European languages. A lot of times for English, a lot of the English loan words are from French. It comes back to the Latin. So you'll see the old French, or even the Middle English, which is a whole nother derivative. But you know all this, because, for the people who don't.
Before you go on, why is that important to find the root and the origin of a word?
Well, language is the conveyor of culture. It's the primary conveyor of culture. So how do people understand things? Understand. There's a word, 3-syllable word. That's not from English. It's from the French. In other words, you got to understand, typically, I mean, just as a rule of thumb, anything over 2 syllables probably is a loan word from the Latin, because the English were very underdeveloped when it came. Underdeveloped. Another word. They're very underdeveloped when it comes to their words. Words, okay, you could, anyway. But the point is this, maybe the old German, you see them little 1-syllable words, fist, stick, knife, gun, fire, bus, war. I mean, I didn't think, but the longer word, it come out of those words. But anyway, but language conveys culture. And so I'm looking for tariff. Clearly, that's not an English word. And so when it disappeared in the OED, now I got to go look at somewhere else. And what did I find? Oh my gosh.
What did you find?
Tariff is part of what they call, we know this word, this phrase, lingua franca. Now, the assumption, and I've made that assumption many times before, is that the franca means from France, but it doesn't, not larger. It comes from franc, F-R-E-N-K. Franc is, at least as far as I've been able to trace, and I'm saying this with the caveat that to say it without doing more than checking 2 or 3 sources is a level of irresponsibility. It's not quite as irresponsible as people Googling something and talking about it in real time. That's completely irresponsible. But I'm thinking, no, I mean, so I checked several sources, and then, I'm going to the terrestrial sources. I'm not just going to go on the internet. Now I got to go look at some other stuff. But at any rate, as far as I've been able to see comparatively, franc from the Turkish, the Turks were using it, and it's derived, it's the base of the word franca in the use lingua franca. Lingua franca is a kind of a pidgin that was used for trade. So in the Mediterranean region, you got a lot of different people trading around that sea that the Romans referred to, and Obenga taught us this. And then we went back and looked at the Latin. When they're speaking about the Mediterranean, they didn't call it the Mediterranean. They called it, what it translates as is our sea. In other words, this our sea. We run all the ports. I'm coming to tariff, if you can imagine. You see where this is going, right? So when they were pushed back from the East by the Muslims, just now we get into the Crusades. Now, a lot of Crusaders were French, the Catholics, of course. And so what you see is that there's this tension, but they're also trading with each other. So lingua franca was a pidgin that was a mix of a lot of different words. And the word franc from the Turkish was used as a label for any European, but especially the Western Europeans and especially the Christians.
You mean tariff?
No. Franc from lingua franca. Tariff is a word in the lingua franca.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
and that language is like Swahili.
Yeah, in a way, yes. In a way, it's interesting you said that, because even when we were in office hours the other week, we were talking about the root of Swahili, realizing that we know that Swahili is a trade language. And I was asking my students, including a couple of kids from Tanzania, a couple of kids who not only taking Kiswahili, but are Kiswahili speakers. And at the root, there's a real debate going on, and it has been going on quite some time among linguists about the nature of the trade language called Kiswahili. So they would say, well, it's Arabic and it's Bantu languages. No, the foundation is Bantu languages. The foundation is African. The loan words that come in are Arabic, but they are not the majority of the words. So Kiswahili is an African language, but as you say, it is a trade language enhanced by the Arabic, just like Hausa in the West. So yes, lingua franca, similarly a trade language, but unlike Kiswahili and unlike Hausa, it is multicultural in a different way, because now you've got non-Europeans and Europeans, all of them with different languages. Arabic is the base that ties much of it together. And when they then have these interactions with these people, and we now call Europeans, because they weren't calling themselves Europeans at that time, the Turks were calling them Franks. And they need language to talk with each other. So the word tariff apparently derives from the Turkish tarif, which comes, here it is, from the Arabic tariff, which means literally from the word arafa, which means to know, meaning to know what? You got to know the price. This is where it comes from. But then it's not European. It's coming from the, and I thought to myself, is this the Moors? Is it because the Europeans not traveling? It's but the Romans are the villains of the piece. This is where it goes back. I'm thinking, as you were talking about, reading about somebody getting their finger cut off for a ring, thereby flattening the distinction between Europe, which is absolutely centered in selfishness, and the rest of the world, much of which isn't. But if you can drop a Kenyan cutting a finger off, you can flatten the fact that y'all's culture is like that. The question I would ask is, once she got her finger cut off, was there anybody in the marketplace that caught that dude? Because if it happened in New York, they would look away. They like to flatten the distinctions to hide themselves. I'm like, no, don't do that. I see what you're doing there. That's either sloppy, that's irresponsible, or it's deliberate, because you want to hide the fact that there are cultures. Every culture in this world is not equal. So the lingua franca, the tariff, I want to know the price. But the Romans did this. It's very interesting. They started developing price lists, including taxes. And this is what happened. The Romans had a tax. Anything that didn't come through a Mediterranean port, our sea, they put a 12 to 25% tax on. It was the Romans. And that sent me back to Ibn Battuta, Ibn Khaldun, because I remember reading in one of Basil Davidson's books, who I was lured to by John Henry Clark, that when they would travel in the Sahel, below the Sahara, the trade went like this. You went to the edge of the desert, put your stuff down, and then you left. Somebody else came from below that, put their stuff down, and left. Then you came back. Then they came back. You never even saw each other. You decided what was fair to take, what was fair, and they exchanged it. There are no tariffs. But in Europe, the Romans are like, if we don't control the port, if it came from somewhere other than what we control, we are taxing you. So again, flattening these distinctions.
Just an aside. So when Jesus came into the temple, the money changers.
That's not an aside. Go on. Yes, please.
The money changers were using the temple to work out all of the taxes and the tariffs. Is that right, Dr.
And there we see a clash of cultures. And Jesus says, well, we're all greedy. So no, Jesus like, y'all got to get the hell out of here, because culturally, this is inappropriate. Now, people will say that's Christianity, but it is Christianity if you're dealing with the Europeans. Because in fact, that was one of the reasons why there were problems between the Europeans, the Christians, the Catholics, and Jews. Because the idea was you couldn't have usury in Christianity.
No, Judaism does not. It is written that they should not charge.
Exactly. Interest. But here's the question.
They can't charge it. In fact, there are banks.
Come on. Let's talk about it now. Yes, ma'am.
That if you were Jewish, you can go and get an interest-free loan.
There are the 4 words.
It is in the book, in their Torah, that you cannot charge interest.
And there are the 4 words that are controlling. The first thing you say, if you are Jews. Here's the thing. In Western Europe, that rule didn't apply to Christians. So what you then see is the trade network. Senator Robinson writes about this in Black Marxism, where the Jewish merchants, we can't charge each other, but these Christians, oh yeah, we gonna get them. So, but the irony is that same rule in the Bible. Ain't none of these people practicing their religion, except for non-Christians. It's no problem. So all the roots of anti-Semitism are not in Africa. They are in Europe. So let's be very clear about this. So, but when you flatten the distinctions, you can call Black people anti-Semitic for even having a conversation like this, and we'll say, okay, no, hell no. What we're gonna call time out is people flattening distinctions. So tariff, as we say, they're talking about people who are now putting these taxes on. So all that's a backdrop to this. The world is responding to this clown because we are in a moment when, as Thomas Friedman wrote, the world is flat, meaning that everything is connected. If we think about this using our Africana Studies conceptual category framework, our 6 conceptual categories, the first conceptual category is the social structure category. That's where virtually all of the popular discourse around what's going on now in the United States with the clown and his court imposing these tariffs or trying to impose these tariffs is coming from. It's in the social structure category. So I'm raising that to say that when Thomas Friedman writes that every part of the world is connected by commerce, either directly or indirectly, he's of course correct, because now there are penguins being taxed by the clown. Of course, I'm joking, but the point is this: uninhabited by humans islands, right? And so people are making fun of that, but that's a social structure making fun of, because ultimately when you say something like that, it's a very anthrocentric, it's a very human-centered worldview. In other words, oh, that's funny, they're taxing the penguins. Yeah, they are taxing the penguins. Penguins ain't paying no currency because they don't have that concept, at least as far as we know, but they are suffering as a result of what the humans are doing. And I'm gonna talk about that in a minute. A new book I'm reading called The Decline and Fall of the Human Empire. Henry G., who has written a number of books, and it's a very interesting book, The Decline and Fall of the Human Empire. I'll talk about that in a minute. But so as these things are emerging, it's very much a social structure conversation. People are talking about the idea that the whole world is connected. And so whether you are in Botswana, there's an article in today's New York Times about Botswana and how they are exporters of a number of things, but one of the main things is textiles and denim. They make the denim that goes in the jeans that many people are wearing around the world. This 40+% tax on them, this tariff, will severely erode their country, their economy. Madagascar, which unfortunately too many people only know because of animated movies. Madagascar is a major exporter. 70% of their agricultural exports, at least the couple of articles I read, are in a little extract called what becomes an extract, the plant out of which is extracted vanilla. So your vanilla, they're facing almost 50%, well, 47% tax, excise tax, tariff tax, because of the clown, and at least temporarily. So the vanilla price goes up. Now, of course, that doesn't mean a whole lot if you don't use vanilla, but if you stop and think about how many things that you consume that do have vanilla in them, that's the goods as well. So that is a social structure conversation we're having. This is a problem that we have grappling with this. But in this week or two, and this has been going on now for over a month, because we knew that Liberation Day was coming. Donald Trump likes to use the word beautiful, another long word, not English, but he likes to use the word beautiful. And I embrace it. I really do. Sometimes I find it difficult because even in thinking about this and being in dialogue with everyone about this, people might mistake my enthusiasm for joy. It's not joy, but it is enthusiasm. There's going to be, as Dr. King would say, that night before he was assassinated, when he was at Mason Temple Church of God in Christ there in Memphis, Tennessee. We got some difficult days ahead. But Dr. King said, I'm not worried about that now. And he didn't make it another 24 hours here. He became a premature ancestor on April the 4th, 1968. I wore my King Center shirt just thinking about this because, and we talked about it, of course, on the air yesterday, much of the day, yesterday and the day before on Sirius on 26. The difficulty is real, but in order to get where we want to go, we're going to have to endure some difficulty, and we're going to have to be clear about this. So in this week where Liberation Day showed up, yes, sir, so beautiful, beautiful Liberation Day, because the clown is going to wreck it. Since we started in this dialogue, Prof, since we've been here now 5 years, from virtually the beginning, over and over again, we've been brought back to the reality that they're going to break it. And I think with every passing day, people get a little bit clearer to the simple fact that there is no polity, P-O-L-I-T-Y. There's no political formation. There's no polis. There's no government. There's no country that has endured from the beginning of human social organization around that concept until now. Countries rise and will fall, and we're now on the back end. And we have been on the back end for quite some time in the United States of America, which means we are also on the back end of what the United States of America represents, which is the extension of the age of Europe. The age of Europe is ending. It hasn't ended because there's too much at stake. Most importantly, nuclear weapons and the threat to the environment by humans, which reading Henry G is a reminder that in many ways, human beings are an invasive species on this ball, but that every species ends. He starts this book with the dinosaurs. I'll come back to that in a moment. So every species ends. We could be facing the acceleration of the inevitable end of Homo sapiens on the ball, because as G writes in this book, at some point, the earth fights every species. And by fights it, not in a violent sense as if the earth is sentient, but in the sense that every species comes here to leave, and humans will be no different. The only question is, how long will it take? And by recent developments over the last century or two, it may just accelerate the end of the species. If we want to stay here longer, we've got some choices to make. And unlike the addled, apartheid, melted clown Elon Musk, the answer to that question, if it does indeed involve extending our species beyond the ball, can't be done on the backs of the rest of the species. You will die before you get to Mars, my molten friend. But at any rate, the whole idea of these tariffs is part of a larger conversation, a social structure conversation we have to say. And in this week where Liberation Day has come, you have this increasingly unstable United States federal government, a client. What did I do with my copy of the New Yorker? I don't think I have it running on. It may be in this bag, but I'm not going to look for it long because I got those yesterday. And just like that, yeah, here, April the 7th. This is the one, is it? Let me see. 3, 2, 1. It is. Yeah. This is the latest issue of the New Yorker. I love the New Yorker cartoons. There's Secretary Brill Cream. There's Junior Varsity. There's old girl who's over all the spies. And behind them, there's little Marco and all them. Yeah. They
Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, Gabbard, love it. Oh, this is the other thing. It's so much. The jokes write themselves. No, they don't. The genius is there. And of course, they're riding the bomb now, and they got their cell phones out, right, as they're bombing. Now, everybody who has seen this, probably many of the young people haven't. We remember the classic send-up of the nuclear age that was filmed and distributed right at the dawn of the nuclear age, Dr. Strangelove. That's what that's clearly a riff toward. They riding the bomb with their unpoliced cell phones. Yay! And we all gonna die. So the whole point, but in this week's New Yorker, the April 7th edition, there's a long article by David Kirkpatrick called The Invisible Man. Can John Thune protect the Senate from irrelevance? And of course, here's John Thune, the leader of the United States Senate, this clown out of the Dakotas. And I call him a clown because he is one politically. And, I'm flattening the subtle distinctions between he and Mitch McConnell, that feckless old ghoul. But what Kirkpatrick does in here, in many ways, he's not attempting to humanize Thune, because it's one thing Whiteness does. It's going to make distinctions within itself, even as it continues its practice of being the most potent, in fact, in many ways, the only diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative of the last millennia is Whiteness. By that, I mean that white people, as James Baldwin would say, those who think they are white are not all the same. They're not all the same in terms of where they come from, their languages, their cultural traditions, when you talk about Europe. But when they congeal together, under the political formation, the social construction, the racial identity we call whiteness, that is a diverse group of people who have undertaken through historical circumstances an equitable distribution of privilege, less equitable in terms of economics and politics, but in terms of their question of identity, there's an fairly equitable distribution. And it's fairly inclusive as well, because you have Spanish speakers who will call themselves white, who are clearly not culturally the same in many ways, but the whiteness allows them inclusion in whiteness. So when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, we really should be talking about whiteness if we're going to be intelligent about it. But the point is that in this article, what Kirkpatrick is talking about is that the Senate could stop a great deal of this. And by the time you finish reading that article, you could see, okay, there are pathways to stop the Klan from doing these tariffs. He evoked emergency measures, pulls out a decades-old law, goes back to the 19th century, and then comes forward into the early 20th century with the idea that there are threats to the United States. And of course, ultimately, with all fascists, with all dictatorships, with all regimes that come to power, as Snyder reminds us in his book on tyranny, as he and his wife and their friend have left for Toronto, go teach at the university there, he reminds us that these tyrannical governments start with the people's consent. As you said, Professor Hunter, the people, the millions who went out, but the millions who did not go out, to the tune of 90 million who didn't vote. So that's the consent of the people, whether they were driven to that by distraction or not. The simple fact of the matter is tyrants don't start by storming the place. They start with the vote, as Hitler did, Mussolini and others, and Trump now, and Vance. But the point is this: the whole idea is that the separation of powers has a built-in measure that has not been tested. Remember, we talked last week, as my friend Sherilyn Ifill opened the 14th Amendment Center at Howard University School of Law, and they had that panel I was talking about with Jamie Raskin on it, and then they had the federal judges, and they were talking about the checks on this insurrectionist who is sitting in the White House that should have been triggered by Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which would prevent anyone who engaged in insurrection from serving as president. But that has not been litigated by the courts. The Supreme Court, that feckless crew, they avoided the substantive question by saying it's Congress's responsibility, which was really a political decision. They could very well have ruled and stopped this. Donald Trump wouldn't be president of the United States. But again, the separation of the power, at least in theory in the United States Constitution, creates the structural check on this very issue we're facing now, this question of tariffs, not only in the United States, but in the world because of Trump. But none of this is settled. All of this can be reversed, can be changed, can be renegotiated, which is what I've been saying now for 5 years. We're at a moment now where we can literally renegotiate the terms of this funky criminal enterprise. And so that gives me a great enthusiasm, maybe bordering on joy in that regard, because there is a path forward if we will take it. But we have to be informed. We have to focus. We have to think about what to do. So in this week where this imposition of these tariffs by an increasingly unstable federal government, because Thune is not going to check them. We've seen now since this, I got this in my mailbox day before yesterday. We saw yesterday the Senate backing up. They're not going to. But we also see people who should not be in the federal legislature now backing away from Trump individually. The craven Rafael Cruz out of Texas, saying that I'm against tariffs. Tariffs hurt the American citizens. Okay, that should be calling Alfred anyway. But Texas, you tried, but you didn't quite get over the finish line, not yet. So you got Cruz for another 6 years. The corpse reminiscent Ron Johnson out of Wisconsin, where there should be Mandela Barnes. Milwaukee, you got close, but you didn't quite get over the line. We understand voter suppression. We understand disinformation, but more people should have went out and vote. That should be Senator Mandela Barnes coming out of Wisconsin, and not the feckless old ghoul from Wisconsin, Ron Johnson. Now that you got to endure for another 6 years, unless, of course, the Grim Reaper intervenes. But then again, he might be the Grim Reaper. At any rate, you see him on television yesterday. This is bad. Oh, you see the fake Southern accent, foghorn, leghorn John Kennedy out of Louisiana, which did its job last weekend. Shout out to my man Gary Chambers and them talking about the fact that Louisiana is not a red state, it's an underfunded state. And they got out there and showed them, rejected all 4 of those proposed constitutional amendments. Shout out to Curtis Jackson, who lost. Now go back and make some more stuff for stars, man. But it's okay. I understand. You got to do what you got to do. But the point is this: in Louisiana, you see Foghorn Leghorn talking, Senator Kennedy. These tariffs are not good for us. And so individually in the Senate, they're beginning to back up. Why? Because the clown has set off a 4-alarm fire around the world. But in this week, where you see the imposition of these tariffs by an increasingly unstable federal apparatus, and it's weaponized by white nationalism, because that's what's holding it together. It's not the economic policy, although there are many who are proposing these things because they get to make profits. And make no mistake about it, when Apple loses $500 billion in stock, when in value rather, you got people now saying it's time to buy. You got people in here right now who are saying it would be stupid not to buy. And I don't even open them pennies I got in my retirement account at Howard, because I know that, like many Black people, I'll never be able to spell, and not even want to spell retire. I'm going to leave it all here and go on to the next phase, whatever that phase is. But I'm quite sure if I did, I would, if I were deeply invested in that, weep open tears, because their value is going. But at the same time, you have people advising people, including a lot of people here, and it might be sensible in a naked capitalist society to go ahead now. Now's the time to buy Microsoft. Now the time is time to buy. Certainly, probably, if you can get some Oracle stock, if you're in that vein, it's time to buy. Why? Because Donald Trump. TikTok is going to close in about 24 or 48 hours. Oh no, they just extended it another month and a half. Why? Because not a month and a half, 2.5 months. They're trying to negotiate, because his friend Larry Ellison, a big Trump supporter at Oracle, wants to buy TikTok, and the Chinese is like, yeah, well, we'll see. That's one of Donald Trump's favorite phrases used to be. We'll see. We'll see. Yeah, we will see. Front page of Financial Times today. Trump defined as Beijing's fight back deepens turmoil. Are y'all gonna blame the Chinese? Yeah, watch this. Gillian Tett on page 9 of the Financial Times. And it's something when they start quoting the Financial Times on the lowest hanging fruit media like CNN and MSNBC. That's when you get let's see, where's Julian Tett? Here she goes. How to Make Sense of Trump's Tariffs, a book from the 1940s, offers a guide for the perplexed. The thesis of her book, the thesis of this article that Gillian Tett wrote this morning, is contained on the front page of the Financial Times under the headline, "Bullies Seem Impregnable Until They Are Not." So the Chinese are like, oh, you want to, what you say, 34%? No problem, 34% to you. Yikes. And Gavin Newsom is like, hey, we in California, please don't do that to us, because $500 billion of stuff came out of Canada, Mexico, and China last year to California. And they said, if it's made here, can we just say, don't put it on us and we'll continue to do business? This is the fracturing. I wasn't just saying, speaking rhetorically, exclusively, that is, when I said it's going to fall apart. That will be dissolved, and the thing is going to be broken. And once it's broken, you won't be able to put it back together. That's what we're seeing now. If you understand the concept of federalism, you know that what I was saying is not a prediction, it's an observation. It's inevitable that this thing is going to fracture, because they don't want it to be together. What holds it together is white supremacy. That's why the Senate is mute. That's why the federal courts, the Supreme Court, has been doing what it does, because white supremacy is the thread that holds this criminal enterprise together. For my materialist friends who would say that it is class, that it is the economy, that it is capitalism, you're absolutely right. But don't underestimate the alloyed thread, because while capitalism is the criminal enterprise, is the extension of the age of Europe, is the engine that powered this crazy last 500 years that has us having this conversation in English, the garbage can language of Western Europe. Make no mistake, while that is the engine, the gas in that engine is white nationalism. And the alloy in the thread of capitalism, the blending thread, that thing that holds that thread and gives it its power, is white nationalism. And that's what holds this polity together. So in this week where these tariffs are being imposed and these government checks aren't doing anything about it, as the rest of the world says, guess, oh, wow, we thought the United States was going to lead the party of the world about 100 years from now, but I guess it's going to be tomorrow. Okay, let's start trading with each other. And people in the United States are like, whoa, don't put us with it. They're tearing at the thread. They're tearing at the thread. California, what you doing? I'm picking with the thread. Anybody want to come with us? And Texas is like, I'm not coming with y'all. We white nationalists. But the people in Texas are like, yeah, we want to come with you. And so what you're going to say, imagine the day when the tariffs are not only from the United States outside, but from states in the United States against other states. Y'all better get organized in Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama. You're going to be trapped behind the cotton curtain when these states like Maryland and New York decide to start putting taxes on your ass. Anyway, the point is it's going to come apart in this week. When, and please, before anybody says, well, the Constitution prevents that. The Commerce Clause of the Constitution prevents that. The question of respecting the laws of other states, the respect of other states. Understand that all of that is in the Constitution. It absolutely is in the Constitution. And y'all know I keep a copy of the Constitution right here. Y'all know I teach. And so I'm very familiar and well familiar with that. But the Constitution, as Gil Scott Heron said in Winter in America, it's a noble piece of paper. Yeah. But also understand in that same song, he says, democracy is ragtime on the corner, meaning what? Hey, those words are great if you stand them up with a meaning that will reinforce the idea of community. And what this country has shown, especially since the end of the so-called civil rights movement, is that white nationalism will fight to the death, yours and mine, to prevent that from happening. So if you don't think that tariffs inside the United States couldn't be imposed, please understand that some of the same arguments that these white nationalists have made to say that they prefer states' rights in the 1960s, to say that they have the right not to allow people to come across state lines or leave the state to terminate pregnancy. Those same arguments will be made by states that say we are not going to live under white nationalist leadership, so therefore we're going to do something to distance ourselves from you. And when they go into courts, that's what you would call something that's been bandied about the last month or so. That's what you would call a constitutional crisis, my friends. A constitutional crisis. That's another one in the series of them. So where I'm going, yes, Kay Kennedy and Nubia, there are plenty of ideas in the Constitution that are not honored. That's what we were talking about at the 14th Amendment Symposium. Because if the 14th Amendment were honored, Donald Trump would not be in office. Because Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is clear. If, as I was talking with my friend Martha Jones last week, who wrote, the book, one of the leading experts in the world on birthright citizenship in the United States, Professor Jones at Johns Hopkins. And, anytime Martha Jones is like, I'm not sure whether they will be able to preserve birthright citizenship or not. You would think it would be very simple. But remember, you're talking about judges who were put on the bench in part because they made a blood oath somewhere in a basement before they lied before the United States Senate confirmation hearings that they would do that. Oh, don't be surprised by anything, because again, the Constitution is a noble piece of paper, but democracy at this point, ragtime on the corner. You can do what they want. So maybe there will be some internal tariffs, but that would lead to an increasingly unstable federal government. It's weaponized by white nationalism. It's stitched together by white nationalism. We're basically talking about DEI going wild, because the DEI is whiteness. Diversity, equity, inclusion of whiteness has gone wild. It's metastasizing. And so, the rest of the world is along for the ride because the thing is woven together. This flattened world, Thomas Friedman and others, many, many, many others writes about. But at the same time, that world is not permanent. That world can and will be renegotiated. The question is what we're going to do inside the borders of these countries, these artificially imposed borders, to move differently and act accordingly in a common human interest that has existed before and will exist again. Flattening of distinctions between cultures notwithstanding. So, I was thinking about that, and there's been a lot going on this week, and we'll talk about, I love it. Nabil, I like to use Larissa, white, entitled, and incompetent term. Yeah, WEI. But I like to use DEI because that's the phrase everybody's using. And for me, points of entry, when you take common language and enter it and test its assumptions, it becomes an easier delivery system for reality. So you know, and I myself, I love, you know, the coining of terms and thinking about it. And actually all of it is good because we're thinking. And once we start thinking, we have to come up with those delivery systems that will penetrate. Because what we're talking about week after week, when I'm talking about here, where we're all in conversation about what we'll be talking about Monday night in Nubia in office hours, and you know, another fantastic set of office hours last week. Thank you, Mama Toya, for coming in and pushing us to think about, and Karen for coming in and pushing us to think about all of these questions of funding, questions of grants. Dr. April coming in. You know, we had a good group discussion, and I'm loving that. Looking forward every week to these continuing conversations where we really kind of push and pull and be in conversation. And as Marie Kelsey would say, agree to agree on things that help us enhance. So what we've been doing over and over again, this ain't nothing new to academics. This is not, this is not new. Academics talk about this all the time. So when we talk about, for example, and just to kind of level set in a minute, thank you, Prof. The question of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as it is commonly used in the United States, refers to basically integrating non-whites and women and those who are somehow different from the commonly bandied about definition of normal, which itself is an illusion, but so those who may be differently abled, those who may be, you know, whether they got some challenge with hearing through their ears and they have to use other forms to communicate, whether they may have some physical challenge that prevents them from using their legs or their arms or something, which means there have to be accommodations made. Well, you want to include those people in whatever is going on that the polity supports, that the government supports, that the society supports. So you got to have, you know, think about it like if you're going to have a room with 50 people in it, you should have 50 people that represent demographically the people who live in the society, or the people who live in the region, or the people who live in the polity, in the locality, so that it should be diverse, racially diverse, gender diverse. I mean, all diversity. It should be equitable. Everyone should be treated with a baseline, a common baseline that puts a floor under them, so that whoever is achieving according to their ability, according to their talent, that's one thing. But there should be a baseline so that no one is without, to the point where they are outside of the circle. So if you see those who are differently, who are housing insecure, if you see those who don't have any resources, there should be an equitable distribution of resources in a way that enables them to at least have a floor. Nobody should be sleeping outside in America. Nobody should be hungry. There are enough resources for that. And inclusion, of course, speaks for itself and means that, of course, you brought people into this. So diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm glad because this was 1999. So 1999, 09, 19, that will be 26 years ago. Actually, 26 years ago this spring. So right around now. And I've told y'all this story before, but so I'll make it very quick. If you go into the compendium, you can find it in a number of courses it was in of our classes. When I was working for the School District of Philadelphia, and they didn't have a job title for me. I had a PhD, I had a law degree. I really wanted to come teach. They said I wasn't certified, so I couldn't go directly in the classroom, which I thought was hilarious. But they put me in an administrative position fairly high up at the school district to kind of develop programs and work on curriculum and go into school. So that allowed me access to all the schools. So I'm just in schools all day, every day, and we're developing stuff. That's where we came up with Philadelphia Freedom Schools. And that was the gateway that led ultimately to us writing the curriculum framework for the mandatory African American history course in Philadelphia. So that was that point of entry. But I remember going to a meeting because every year they would have an equity conference at the school district. This is when David Hornbeck was the superintendent of schools. Very much a committed to diversity, equity, inclusion guy. The way it's defined here in the United States is the way it's defined generally in the United States. Hornbeck, white man, but really social justice warrior, all about equity and diversity, very important. So when he had his conference, it was a school district wide convening right there. I think it was planned in that spring. Maybe it opened in the fall, like the beginning of the school year. Hornbeck was always good for shaking things up. At the time, Philadelphia had 257 schools in the Philadelphia public schools, the 5th largest school district in the country. So I'm sitting at the table with the superintendent and associate superintendents, and we're trying to plan this conference. The name of the conference every year was ALL, means All, A-L-L. All means all. All means all. Meaning if you're going to have something, that's for everybody. Yeah, all. All of us. Why? That all means all. So they had tracks. They had race. They had gender. They had ethnicity, culture. They had tracks. And then the principals, the teachers, the students, everybody came and they were dividing these tracks, had a big conference down at the Philadelphia Convention Center. Everybody's there. Mandatory for the principals and things like that, mandatory for school administrators, and mandatory for many teachers. They could get in-service credits. The students would come do presentations. And so we're in there planning the conference. How are we going to do it? I'm in the room and they're going around the table. Okay, who's going to do culture? Who's going to do race? Who's going to do gender? Dividing up how to organize. They're not going to do it all. And yes, so as the conversation is unfolding, they got an ethnicity track. And I'm sitting there thinking, as an adopted Philadelphian by this time, about how ethnicity works. But I'm also a student of Theophilo Benga. So we're doing etymology. I'm thinking ethne from the Latin and the Greek, ethne meaning other, ethnic. But ethnicity in this society and is generally used to talk about difference as it relates to language and culture. So you talk about Enid Green at the time had published a very good book called Beyond Heroes and Holidays. So you talking about celebrating. I want to bring my ethnic dress, my ethnic food, my ethnic culture, and that kind of thing. So when people talk about multiculturalism, they're really talking about, different ethnic groups, right? The Irish, the Italians, and the Black Americans. Is that an ethnic group? Not sure. Cubans, ethnicity, right? This kind of thing. Where are you from? Geography, language, So there's ethnicity, but I'm thinking about it in its kind of fundamental sense. This is where it's going to lead up to DEI being whiteness. So as the people going around there, who's going to help organize, we get to ethnicity, there's silence. Nobody going to speak up? Now, I ain't been there long in the school district. I'm in the room and I'm really about protocol. Angie Porter has used that word very beautifully, protocol. So if y'all not going to say, well, I'll take a stab at it. Okay. So I organized the ethnicity track, at least helped organize it. I wasn't responsible for organizing it, but I helped. And I took a workshop and named it Shades of Whiteness. Huh? Yeah, because to think about ethnicity, I went back to the root of the word and the language the history that the language represents. Ethne coming out of the Greek meant other than Greek, elos, the Greeks. Not even when we say Greeks, that is the meaning thing. Is it Athens? Is it Sparta? If it's Athens, do you have land? Are you a woman? Are you a captive? So ethne means other. Then the Romans get it, inherit it, and create this concept where they say it means other than Roman. We just heard about one of the origins of tariff when the Romans are like, if we ain't controlling the port, we're going to put a tax on you. That's the tariff for them. Tariff coming out of the Turks, relying on the Arabs, or the Muslims rather, Arabic, for this term, which means the Europeans, lingua franca, the language we use to trade with them. And so it means us and them. Ethne means us and them. Ethnic means other than us. It is the root of the word heathen. It is the root of the word ethnic and the root of the word heathen, the same thing. Heathen means what? Other than Christian. The Romans become Christians, and other than Christian. You're a heathen, meaning what? You don't believe in Christ. You're not a Christian. So it means other. So for me, I created this workshop called Shades of Whiteness, where I said, in this society, whiteness is us, and non-whiteness is them. So if you're going to have all means all, you're going to have displaced the elephant in the room. What is the elephant in the room? The elephant in the room is the normative logic of whiteness, which is constructed to be not them. And the whole fight that we have in this society is to acquire some shade of whiteness, not just physically, economically, educationally, politically. Think about it. A person is as close to the shade of this shirt as you can imagine in human existence, and nobody looks exactly like this, but somebody who would still say, I got to go to this school, I got to go to the Ivy League, and once I get it, I got to get this clerkship, I got to get this internship. Why? Because I'm trying to acquire a proximity to whiteness. I need a shade of whiteness because the norm is whiteness is the norm that structures the whole society. As you can imagine, the conference, that workshop was a big hit. And I've been thinking about it ever since. Now I'll tie that to the DEI. And before I do, though, let me show y'all this book right here that I just got maybe about a week ago, because I was reading the description and I went out and found it. And then I read the prologue, and I got to figure out when I'm going to get time to read this, because this just it's an affirmation. Again, the scholars talk about this all the time. This is Ada Palmer's brand new book called Inventing the Renaissance, the Myth of a Golden Age. She's saying what we already know. The Renaissance is made up. You know, Greeks and Romans connected to the European. No, she's walking through this. This book is 743 pages. And she's walking through, in fact, let me just read it. From the darkness of a plague and war-torn Middle Ages, the Renaissance, we're told, heralds the dawning of a new world, a halcyon age of art, prosperity, and rebirth. Hogwash, or so says award-winning novelist and historian Ada Palmer. In Inventing the Renaissance, Palmer turns her witty and irreverent eye on the fantasies we've told ourselves about Europe's not-so-golden age. Myths she sets right with sharp clarity. She goes on. She says, Palmer's Renaissance is altogether desperate. Troubled by centuries of conflict, she argues, Europe looked to a long-lost Roman Empire, even its education practices, to save them from unending war. Is everybody around the world fighting the same way? Cut off a finger in a Nairobi market? Is that the same as what England did to the world? Absolutely not. We continue. Later historians met their own, and remember, there is no Nairobi without Kenya, and there is no Kenya except the imaginary lines Europeans drove around it, which leads you to ask the question, did the people who live in Kenya, who call themselves Kenya now, the Luyo and the Gikuyu and all those people, were they cutting off fingers before the Europeans came and imposed upon them a structure that would have severe structural inequality, that would have somebody so desperate that they would cut off somebody else's finger to get the ring? I think the answer to that, we already know. We continue and say later historians met their own political challenges with a similarly nostalgic vision, only now they look to the Renaissance and told a partial story. To right this wrong, Palmer offers 15 provocative portraits of Renaissance men and women, some famous, some obscure, whose lives reveal a far more diverse, fragile, and wild Renaissance than its glowing reputation suggests. This is actually the University of Chicago Press, Inventing the Renaissance. But my point is this: the Renaissance was invented.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
We go to school. We go to school to learn.
Mm-hmm.
We go to these massive universities to learn.
That's why
I'm asking a question right now, because we're at an inflection point that we've identified. This is going to break. People go to school to get degrees. You get degrees based on your grades, based on your ability to be able to master the information that people give you. If the information is based in myth and widely wrong and inherently racist, and you master it, and you have a degree based on your mastery of this, how do we dismantle this? I mean, we're doing it, but this is such a, I'm sitting here, I'm like, who hasn't taken, a class on this? And you tout the Europeans, the Romans, the Greeks, you never go back to Africa, though. You never ask the question about, where did Socrates get this thing that made them want him to die? Where did Jesus get this thing that didn't exist before that made people want him to be on the cross and for them to take Barabbas over him? Where did this come from?
Yeah.
And if you have to examine that, it's not just about saying Black people are superior. It's to say, this is the history.
Right.
When are we going to ever really dismantle all of the books of lies that we have on our shelves, in our classrooms, that we've indoctrinated the babies with? I had to do the Pledge of Allegiance, and I knew that 1492, Christopher Columbus, Ocean Blue, we had all these things that we had to memorize. And now we have to unmemorize and read. I know we're here, but walk us through how we dismantle this.
Well, other than what we are doing, connected with others who are doing this and coordinating it, is the only path we have. It is ultimately a failing path, but the alternative is surrender, which we as a species are hardwired not to do. So the simple answer, and you knew, because you said, we're here. This is why this metronome is so important, week after week, and then tying it to other, I mean, you know, people turn on channel 126 series and it's a constant flow of reverse engineering what the assumptions we've been fed, and really cultivating cultivating the innate desire to think for ourselves. We all have that desire. So it's there. It's every initiative that does that. Which is why in narrative, setting up those rooms, the teachers lounge being one of the first ones, where teachers can share their experiences, stockpile information. It's the hundreds of bookstores on our list where people can buy these books and think. It's the weekly convenings in the classes where we can come together. And it seems like a drop in the ocean until we realize that there are many drops, a lot of different places. Last week, we were talking about the documentary, How to Build a Library. And, you know, the idea that there are people doing things, this is a critical moment. In our Africana Studies framework, in our course, one of the framing question 4, asked the question, you know, how did African people in the late 19th, early 20th century begin to become aware of themselves, of each other, and create an oppositional force around the world? This takes us into the early 20th century, into early 1900s. And I'm answering the question by way of just illustrating the effect that some of these forces can have on that work of transforming ourselves. You know, our 4th conceptual category, which we'll probably start week after next. We're going to finish up Marimba Ani on Monday night, and then we're going to go into the 4th conceptual category, which is science and technology. The improvements in communication technology and transportation technology that take place in the late 19th, early 20th century, shipping, railroads, automobiles, ultimately the telegraph and radio, people become aware of each other on a global scale. And then, of course, the wars that Europeans drag us into, like so-called World War I, like the so-called Spanish-American War, which is the Cubans trying to get rid of the Spanish. Those Africans who get on transports and end up in Cuba, who are from Mississippi or Alabama or South Carolina, North Carolina, who go down there and see other Africans who speak Spanish, not English, but who look like them. And then they begin to figure out ways and then ultimately to communicate with each other, and then realize, well, we're down here too. And let's compare conditions. Oh, that's different, but that's the same, or that's similar. That begins to engender this sense of commonality. This is why the American descendants of slaves is a poison and must be rooted out, because when you separate yourself, you diminish your ability to achieve the goal you say you want locally. So the answer, as I'm kind of bringing it right to the question that you raised, Prof, and the answer you gave, which is doing what we're doing. In the late 19th, early 20th century, it was the technology of communication that allowed us to see, oh, and that transforms the movement of African people and oppressed people globally. And the 20th century is all about the revolt of oppressed people against oppressive regimes, oppressive constructs, and the response to that revolt against that. Because what we've been experiencing in the last couple of generations, several generations globally, is the death knell, the death rattle of European empire that has expressed itself through white nationalist movements. I tell you who understands that really critically is Steve Bannon. This is an excellent book that came out last year called Finish What We Started. Isaac Arnsdorf, The MAGA Movement's Ground War to End Democracy. Now, we've talked about Steve Bannon a lot. One thing I absolutely respect Steve Bannon on, Steve Bannon is a white supremacist globalist. And he understands that these things that he wants to continue, the death rattle of European empire, has to be attacked globally. It only looks local to these MAGA clowns, but it's a global movement. Now, how do we fight back? By doing what we're doing. Just as in the late 19th, early 20th century, the telephone, the telegraph, the radio, then ultimately movies, then transportation allows you to travel a little bit for those who have a nominal means or those caught up in war. It transforms the local struggles. The civil rights movement in the 1960s is absolutely fed by Black veterans coming back from World War II, like Medgar Wiley Evers. Black people who say we will no longer tolerate these conditions we face here in the United States, just like when they came back from World War I, 1919, the Red Summer, they come back fighting. And you see, as Du Bois writes, we return fighting. If you read Chad Williams' excellent book, The Wounded World, on how Du Bois wrote a whole book about how the world transforms. 1915, just as the United States is getting into war, he writes that essay, The African Roots of the War, where he says this is a resource struggle that's global. Du Bois saw it. And then he begins to inform all his scholarship, Black Reconstruction in America. Yes, it's about the Civil War and Reconstruction in the United States, but he puts it in a global context and starts that massive 700 plus page book with Captivity of Africans. Before that, who Africans were before that. I'm saying all that to say that there are people here who are like, I didn't know any of this, or I know that it's there. Now I got to figure out, where do I start? Where do I start? That's why we have office hours on Monday night. But we're not alone. This is the churches who are now teaching, because the pufferfish in Florida and all these other people, in a minute we'll talk about South Carolina and them trying to end diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives there. You know, that's why the churches, that's why the community centers, that's why the people here in Nubius, on the Nubius side, who come in every week and give us updates on the educational initiatives that are going on, whether it be the school in South Carolina or Florida, whether it be the library in Opobo, whether it be all of these individual pieces, the Black Man Lab in Atlanta, you know, where we see my man Molly Davis, whether it be people feeding the independent schools in Philadelphia, whether it be Mama Toya with the grandmothers for literacy in Philly. Well, you go out to the West Coast, my sister Sharon Johnson, who was always here writing and thinking, and knew Makeda Kumasi, you know, with the arts and tying that to intellectual work that starts in ancient Egypt. All of that we bring, and we become aware of each other. So the technology allows us to connect now. Is that going to be enough? That ain't the question. The question isn't whether it's going to be enough. The question we ask is, what's the alternative? Not what can we do? We know what we can do, and we are doing it. What we can do better is be aware of each other, coordinate, connect, organize that into a compelling force, which is why hats off to Gary Chambers and everyone else in Louisiana who transformed the door-to-door, the conversation-based work into enough of a political force to beat back and achieve a local victory in Louisiana. That didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen because of TV ads. It didn't happen because of celebrities. Because if that's the case, a man who named himself 50 Cent would have been successful in harming the poor in Louisiana, but he's not successful. Even as some of them Negroes probably had in the club on their earpods as they went in to vote against what the guy who made In the Club was telling them to do. Why? Because that separation, that ability to engender critical thinking, is the absolute result of a metronome of steady dialogue, steady engagement, dialogue, steady engagement, which looks like it is impossible to do at a level that would transform until a transformation happens. So I'm saying that we know the answer. The alternative is not to do anything. And if there were a better way to do this, we would identify it. I'll say this finally. We've been here now for 5 years. You've been at this now for a lot longer than that, decades. Writing, thinking, then broadcasting, engendering this kind of connection day after day, week after week, month after month, now year after year. The shift is clear. Because see, once the technology emerged for people to talk with each other without the policing of the kind of bottlenecks that used to be commercial terrestrial media, now everybody got a podcast. Everybody got a YouTube channel. And I'm watching even friends of mine who tried it the other way. Now everybody jumping on the internet. Well, guess what? Come on and jump. Keep jumping. Because I tell you, influence is real. And our conversations are highly influential because you can see it in how people are talking, how people are emboldened to talk. And so I'll pause that there and come back to it in a minute. 50 Cent, now you work a quarter. I see you, Gordon. It's funny. So to kind of finish up on the DEI thing coming, after that Shades of Whiteness conversation that we had at the school district 26 years ago, it kind of shifted for me how to think about this question of whiteness. It was another stage in that. And so diversity and equity and inclusion now, as we sit here today, I use that language not to tie it to non-whiteness being integrated with whiteness, but to tie it to how people who are on the surface different come together as a group. What's the political reason? What's the social reason? What's the cultural reason? What are some of those reasons? And when we say that, when we divorce diversity, equity, inclusion of its racial tint, of its racial foundation, what you can see is this is really about group making. It's about world making. And in that world making, in a racial society, now we reintroduce race, the diversity equity, and inclusion of whiteness is the most potent identity politics of the last 1,000 years. Certainly the last 500. Certainly the last 500. Now I'll come back to that in a minute. So last night, after a day of attending a very beautiful ceremony, shout out to the new dean of the Howard University School of Law, the good brother Roger A. Fairfax Jr. This is the program from yesterday, Howard School of Law. They had the formal installation of Dean Fairfax. It was a beautiful, this good brother right here, Northeast DC raised, born and raised, a brilliant brother, great leader, very good brother. Y'all, people may know his baby brother better than him, at least in terms of popular discourse in the United States. That would be Justin Fairfax. I saw my man Justin Fairfax, good brother, Justin Fairfax yesterday. That's Roger Fairfax's brother. But it was really quite something. Again, Northeast DC, Archbishop Carroll High School, went off to Harvard College for undergrad, then Harvard Law School, where he met not only his wife, Lisa Fairfax, who some of y'all may have seen testify at the confirmation hearing of a Supreme Court justice recently, in the last 5 years or so. She testified there because all of them, in fact, Lisa Fairfax's roommate was who she was testifying for on Capitol Hill. Yes, her roommate's Ketanji Onyeka Brown Jackson, who actually yesterday gave the keynote address at the installation. They were all, friends from Harvard Law, long time students of the great Charles Ogletree, who is now, of course, an ancestor. It was a beautiful, beautiful convening, and I won't go through the program, but I'm raising it for this reason. We were there all afternoon, and then after the reception into the evening, so I got back here just in time to catch a few minutes of the game between the University of South Carolina lady, what do they call them? Women Gamecocks, Lady Gamecocks. I saw you were talking about it. You said you called, what are they, Lady Gamecocks? Anyway, I'm not sure. Because that's a whole other thing. Versus, not UCLA. They played the other team, Texas, University of Texas. And of course, watching them, I remember when South Carolina won the national championship a couple of years ago, and they had a glimpse. I read an article about the band, the South Carolina pep band that goes with them. And they were saying, the band is their secret weapon. And I heard the band last year, I guess it was, playing Talking Out the Side of Your Neck. And I said, yeah, look at y'all with them H.B.C.U. bands. So, LSU been doing that for years with their janky version of Neck. But with HBCU band stuff. But as we're watching, you're watching these young sisters, Raven Johnson and them, all for Wally, all them playing, and Don Staley patrolling the sidelines, his favorite daughter of Philly, walking them sidelines of Columbia, South Carolina. And I'm thinking about that in the context of these hillbillies in the South Carolina legislature that this same week just passed by a vote in the South Carolina State House, 82-32, a bill banning diversity, equity, and inclusion in South Carolina that mirrors virtually word for word the clown's executive order. And they're bragging about ending illegal DEI mandates in state government and education and public contracts, and eliminating race-based preferences, forced ideology, identity-based discrimination. They're bragging about that, even as the clown now tells Europeans to do business with the United States, you got to get rid of your DEI. And France looking at them like, oh, we already solved the problem of we don't keep records on race. Remember, France did that quite some time ago. Understand the importance of that. Once you stop counting the data, there are two things that can happen. One, you can just do it as a matter of course. The other, you integrate people and put people in, but you're not tracking because you say, oh, we don't believe in race in France. We don't believe in race. Even as y'all, some of the most anti-Muslim, anti-Black people in the world live in France. Is tolerance, again, another lie, although there's a lot of tolerance in France or in the United States. This is why they send the musk rats in, grape nuts in them, to destroy the federal government's capacity to track data. You go to the Secretary of Wrestling's shop, the Department of Education, you got to get rid of the data. Why? Because we don't want to collect any data. That way, our white supremacy can't be called to court on any numbers. We want to get rid of all the data we can. So I'm saying all that to say this: getting rid of DEI in Europe is not going to be as easy. What would be called DEI in contemporary parlance, it's not going to be as easy as telling them, if you don't get rid of it, we're not going to trade with you, because these trade wars, he's going to quit these trade wars in a minute because his minders, his owners going to call, say, that's enough, clown. So you're not going to be able to do it. But in South Carolina, Will they be able to do it? It'll depend on what the courts say, what the courts do, and this is how we fight as well. You got to go to court. Win or lose, you got to go to court. I'm talking more about that in a minute with Dean Fairfax's installation. But the bill that they passed this week in the South Carolina State House, 82 to 32, the same state house that we were in about a month ago, and saw that statue of John C. Calhoun again and paid respects. You know what I mean by that. They went in there and voted 82-32 to impose this anti-DEI bill that mirrors the Trump bill. And I thought about it last night as I'm watching the University of South Carolina play. Why? Because you're watching the court, you're seeing all these black women, you're seeing all these indigenous women like Pow Pow, you know, her people, Proud Samoans in the stands. She got her tattoo showing, you know. You see the white players, right? The white girl who's the center for the University of South Carolina, she out there playing. And it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. At least the way it's defined in a racist society, meaning non-whites. It's overwhelmingly non-white with some white people in there. 10%, roughly speaking, 10% of the University of South Carolina's 20,000 plus student body is black. They would say we're one of the most diverse campuses in the world. I mean, in the country. No, you're white with a sprinkling of non-whites in it. That's what y'all define as diversity. Yeah, that's what you define as diversity. The state of South Carolina is at least a quarter black, according to the white nationalist numbers, the census numbers. We all know that it's more than that. And the younger you go, even by their numbers, it goes over a third very quickly. Because the demographics in this country have changed inexorably to look more like the world that the people who were brought here, the people who were already here, and the people who came here, the world looks very different than the place that got convened after they were able to kill so many indigenous people. And in fact, the United States is looking more and more like the rest of the world. Demography is destiny, friends. Steve Bannon is bleeding, looking like himself, a disheveled man who is housing insecure. Even as he is a millionaire, he plays a different role when you see him. Bannon is clear. This is the end of whiteness. Now, of course, whiteness may say we're going to take all the rest of humanity with us as we die as a concept. But I'm saying that as a prelude to this. Bannon understands it. So do I. And I'm saying that fear that's driving that hatred, that same fear that's driving that hatred that says, as Isaac Arnsdorf, who interviewed hundreds of MAGA people, regular MAGA people, to finish what we started. What is that? White control over the country. That's an illusion. You never had it, number one. And number two, your grip on whatever you thought you had before now is so tenuous now. And your man's is getting ready to break the whole thing. And we're going to negotiate the terms. And we're not waiting on it to completely break to do that. We are actually at the upswing now. It looks like the darkest time, but it's not the darkest time. Not if we make sure that it's not. Anyway, so I'm watching this game. And I'm looking at this court, which looks more like the rest of the world. And I'm looking at this group in the band. I'm looking at this group of cheerleaders. And I'm looking at this group of fans in attendance. Excise out the families of the players. And I'm saying, with the people who have money to travel to Tampa to get a hotel room, to eat what they want, and to bring their whole family and cheer, 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 and then go back to a state where that hillbilly horde in the hyper-gerrymandered state of South Carolina is saying, we don't want diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm looking at that, and it just hit me like, I agree with you hillbillies. 100%. No more diversity, equity, and inclusion in South Carolina, but I'm defining it the way it should be defined by all of us. Diversity, equity, and inclusion of whiteness must be broken up. I think the band and the cheerleaders and the University of South Carolina and all the fans who are cheering that they cut to after a Pow Pow 3 or 4 Wally drives in the paint, I think everybody should reflect the racial composition of the players. I'm tired of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm tired of whiteness. Let's make the people attending the game reflect the same makeup of the people playing the game. Oh, well, come here. Give me your wrist, hillbilly. drag your ass right back out here out that chamber where you just voted and stand you up in front of your Lord and Master, John C. Calhoun. Listen to this, my friend. Everybody who dribbles a ball at a place where they getting rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion should say, until this place look like the team I'm on, I don't play for you. Because guess what? Theoretically, Prof, you're right. We go to college to learn. We go to universities to learn. We know that is absolutely not the case for athletes who have aspirations beyond college. One and done is now antiquated. The one and done of the years of John Calipari and Rick Pitino, these aging white coaches who have emerged, reemerged, get chance after chance after chance to do the pimp game. What is John Calipari doing at the University of Arkansas, as many people need help in Arkansas, and they paying him millions to win basketball games, because the same thing happens in the University of Arkansas, a state where they could have had a whole rocket scientist be the governor, and instead you picked the last propaganda Barbie who stood up and vomited lies over everybody, and now Huckassan is the governor. Wonder what's going to happen to this current propaganda Barbie who's up there vomiting. Maybe she'll be the governor of Kansas. Who knows? But my point is this, because whiteness is a terrible thing that continues to reintroduce this. Well, guess what? What did them players say? Cal, we understand you can get me to the NBA, and I understand that you only want me here for 7 months. I understand that you got to register me for classes, so I'm going to go to a couple of classes initially, and then they ain't going to see me no more. And by the time they get ready to flunk me out of school, I will have already declared for the draft. And if you don't treat me right, I'm going to take my transfer portal and I'm going to go play for Kentucky. Why? Because, or Louisville. Why? Because, or Texas. Why? Because, or St. John's. Why? Because now with the transfer portal, I ain't got to set up no time, and I'm basically using college as a branding opportunity to allow me to get to the league. What about me? I'm on the end of the bench. I'm a DEI player. What do you mean you're a DEI player? I'm that white player on the end of the bench who never plays, but I'm going to go into coaching one day, and because of diversity, equity, inclusion, I've been included on the roster. But I'm not going to the NBA. That's okay. We've set up a structure here at fill in the blank university where there is the money that individuals will get because of who they are, their names, images, and likenesses. And then there's the money that we get when we pool the resources and distribute checks to everybody on the roster. Now, if we recruit you because you're a superstar in high school, we will pay you $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 to play for 7 months. But if you're sitting on the end of the bench because you're a DEI hire and you're going to go into coaching one day and make a whole lot of money coaching these people, the sons and daughters of your teammates, DEI, whiteness, you're not going to make $500,000 a year, but we will give you a check for $50,000 or $100,000 or $25,000 because we've got a pool. Now, guess what? That mechanism, so beautiful, can work exactly the same way at the University of Arkansas, Pine Bluff, or Grambling State University. He can work at Tennessee State. He can work at South Carolina State. So if Don Staley was to announce, you know what, DEI, no problem, I'm against it too. I'm going to go across the street to Orangeburg. And I'm going to go to South Carolina State. Later for the Gamecocks, all in for the Bulldogs. And all these sisters who want to play for Don Staley, since y'all going to the WNBA anyway, and for all of you who are not going to the WNBA, but who have some name, image, or likeness, or better yet, let's build a pool at state and we'll have a following. Guess what will happen, my friends? Those whose commitment to Don Staley and the South Carolina Lady Gamecocks is so deeply rooted in their love for Dawn. Those in the cheering stands, those cheerleaders, those band members, the president, the administration, the sportscasters, they love Dawn. They love Dawn. The minute Dawn Staley get in her car and drive to South Carolina State, she will be the biggest villain in the history of the state, and the N-word will vomit out freely. Why? Because it was never about her as a human. It was about her as a commodity. See, understand that it is not proximity to blackness that upsets whiteness. It is the control of blackness and losing it that upsets them. When they say diversity, that means I want your ball players, I want a couple of 4.0s, and I want you people to be under my control for my entertainment and for my edification and for the building of my apparatus that will allow me to have control. There's a very interesting book that came out a few months ago called Plantation Goods, Seth Rockman, A Material History of American Slavery. What Professor Rockman does, he's at Brown University, he does an economic history of slavery, and he talks about the fact that there is no North, there is no South. In fact, let me just read you a little bit from the cover leaf. The industrializing North and the agricultural South. That's how we've been taught to think about the United States in the early 19th century. But in doing so, we overlook the economic ties that have held the nation together before the Civil War. We miss slavery's long reach into small New England communities, just as we fail to see the role of Northern manufacturing in shaping the terrain of human bondage in the South, using plantation goods. The shirts, hats, hoes, shovels, shoes, axes, and whips made in the North for use in the South. Historian Seth Rockman locates the biggest stories in American history in the everyday objects that stitch together the lives and livelihoods of Americans, white and black, male and female, enslaved and free, across an expanding nation. So the stuff they're making in New England gets shipped to the South so that people could wear it while they picking cotton. The cotton that the people are picking in the South gets shipped to England to create the textiles, shirts and stuff that are shipped back to New England, and then that are improved upon or competed with and then sent south. In other words, the whole thing is connected. There's no North and South when it comes to our captivity. I'm bringing that up to understand that how you break through to create a nation, because this isn't a nation. In other words, create a polity with common language, common understanding, to break through all that noise, to try to create a common humanity that will have no one sitting outside, no one sleeping outside, is education. We're here week after week, helping us to stimulate ourselves to read, to think, to discuss, to escape the myths. That enhances everyone's capacity to go into wherever you work and spread that capacity. It also enhances our ability to support everyone who's already doing that work by making each other aware of what you are doing. We're building community. And those who don't want that community, those who would say, South Carolina, where's she going? Where? You are the brother of one. Oh, you're one of the legislatures. You know how many of them hillbillies who voted against their version of DEI in South Carolina legislature this week cheered themselves hoarse last night for black women running up and down a basketball court in Tampa, Florida against other black women running up and down a basketball court in Tampa, Florida with the word Texas on their chest. And they were cheering for the ones that said South Carolina on their chest because they love black women, literally and figuratively, when those black women are under their control. You know how many of them racists who voted 82-32 to put Trump's DEI executive order in language in South Carolina, thereby becoming the first state in this country to say we're going to do it on a state. You know how many money, and you know how many, and some of you hillbillies may watch this. I'm teaching to you now, hillbilly, and all y'all who love them. Guess what? I love you too. Because you're going to help us finally understand. And when we do, and when we start going to H.B.C.U.s for a year or 7 months, or some of them kids is going to stay the full 4 years, because guess what? Unlike the University of South Carolina or University of Texas, unlike the University of California at Los Angeles or the University of Connecticut, because yeah, plantation goods will show you it ain't just the South. Understand, Gino, that when you show up to recruit somebody and they say, yeah, I'm going to go to Cheney. I'm going to pick a school. He said, nobody will go to Cheney. Name, image, and likeness don't work at Cheney. In fact, some of these small schools, some of these small H.B.C.U.s, and shout out to Paul Quinn and others who have joined this new H.B.C.U. conference, newer H.B.C.U. conference in the CIAA. I think they're over a dozen now. Stillman is in it. Oakwood is in it. Fisk is in it. I was looking at the graphic like, this is a great idea. Guess what? Gymnasts going to Fisk and Talladega? Ah. Name, image, and likeness? Would that work in gymnastics? Probably. I'm saying, look, now you may have a harder time with these brothers playing football. Well, I wouldn't start with your brothers. Y'all know I've said this many times. And, you know, Karen, you were talking about women's basketball, which you covered a long time and foresaw a lot of what's going on. Hey, let's start with women's basketball. Because the coach of Jackson State was the bomb. Then they recruit her to go to a mid-major. Well, guess what? If you're pumping money in it, you might be able to flip this a lot more quickly in women's basketball. But the point I'm trying to make is that to change the view of everything, there's a couple of strategies. On one end of the spectrum is you try to tell the story of the United States in a way that elevates the facts and lets people choose for themselves and doesn't exclude anybody. What whiteness, the real DEI, would call DEI. Diversity, equity, inclusion, meaning all the non-whites are joined, and all means all. But as I said at the All Means All presentation back in 1999, what I said was, yeah, I'm calling this shades of whiteness because there's a critical distinction I'm going to make. When you say all means all, you mean differently able people and women and blacks and Latinos and all that stuff. Well, I'm using it very differently because in a white nationalist society, when they say all means all, what they really mean is all means y'all. All means y'all. All is us. Y'all is other than us. Ethne, other than us. So when they say they're against diversity, equity, and inclusion, they want you, but they want you under their control. And it's a y'all. So if you want to tell a different story, you're going to get pushback. The news this week about, last week, we talked about the executive order that Trump put out against the Smithsonian, which he doesn't control. He can appoint some people to the board, but then there are other people, Congress and others, who appoint people to the board. It's also a public-private partnership. He cannot put the Smithsonian under his thumb. You've got to fight back. Well, guess who I know is going to fight back? My man Lonnie Bunch, Dr. Bunch. Here he is on the cover of New York, on the front page of New York Times today. Executive order puts leader of Smithsonian in tough spot. That New York Times always trying to sane watch these white boys. Oh man, I didn't read the obituaries today. Leonardo Patterson, 82, disgraced dealer in Latin American artifacts. They got a headline on the brother. Oh my God, let me not get distracted. I'm gonna finish up today. We're gonna come in for a landing because in a minute I'm going over to see, we're gonna have the ritual for the great elder Russell Lee Adams. His celebration is today, celebration of life of Russell Adams over at the Howard University School of Law, Dumbarton Chapel at 2 p.m. It's also going to be live streamed. And thank you, Bobby Kemet, Brother Kemet. You put the link in Nubia I saw earlier when I opened up the in-class page. And if y'all don't mind putting that in both Mbangis, in the Nubia Mbangi and the YouTube Mbangi, I greatly appreciate it because y'all can live stream it. Dr. Billingsley is coming. He reached out yesterday. He wants to say a few words. Andrew Billingsley, the former president of Morgan State University, for many years, the vice president for academic affairs at Howard, who really tried to build the Black university concept. It's the closest we've gotten to the H.B.C.U. But Lonnie Bunch is on the front of the New York Times. Executive order puts him in a tough spot. He is, of course, the head of the Smithsonian Institution. And the article reads, Lonnie G. Bunch III has served as a museum director, educator, and historian, all positions in which he has demonstrated a skill for diplomacy. But perhaps no amount of charm or discretion can help him avoid the fight he now faces over the direction of the Smithsonian Institution, the cultural behemoth he stewards. An executive order signed last month that accused the Smithsonian of, quote, promoting narratives that portray American and Western values as inherently harmful and oppressive, end quote. President Trump called for an end to spending on exhibitions or programs that degrade shared American values, divide Americans by race, or promote ideologies inconsistent with federal law. This was, of course, Donald Trump's pro-DEI executive order. By pro-DEI, I mean pro-diversity, equity, inclusion of whiteness. Because when this clown vomits something like American and Western values, what he means is white coming from Europe. There were no white people in Europe. There were Europeans who crossed those seas. They became white over here, and they have fought to preserve and extend that definition that they created here because they were not indigenous, they were not Africans, and they were not like each other. They were not like each other. And they have those lingering tensions. Ask the Irish about the English. They have those lingering tensions. Ask the Italians in Italy. Ask the Sicilians about the Italians. They have those lingering. You know what allowed them to become white? The Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiative called white supremacy, global white supremacy, which is a fantasy in their mind that they then went back and found ancestors they had no direct relationship to create a myth to prop it all up. And then they started teaching us. And after centuries, we stand around here teaching each other because we have forgotten where we came from. And guess what? Week after week, we're disabusing ourselves of that lie, of that notion, and allowing ourselves to form a common humanity. First out of our common experiences and then to the world, as Du Bois would say. And that's that work of metronome, week after week after week. So Dr. Bunch is one way to do it in the spectrum because he was over the Museum of American History. He's the founding director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. What Lonnie Bunch did was say, I'm going to take a stab at getting as many people of common will and who differ in opinions about different things, but have a common commitment to our common humanity to gather in these museum spaces. He starts at the local level, right? Jersey kid, PhD, Howard University, history. I'm going to then move to different places, Cincinnati, and I'm going to come to the Smithsonian and work for decades. And then I'm going to open this museum, African American history, where we're going to tell the story of America through Blackness. I respect that. I admire it. And as I have shared with him, I have a fundamental tension around starting our history with captivity, which the museum, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, does not do strictly, but the overemphasis on our captivity reinforces the idea that we dropped out of the sky naked in chains, talking about give us free. And this whole notion of African identity in the United States has been toward building a more perfect union. I understand the logic. I understand the diplomacy. I support the sentiment, but I absolutely reject us sacrificing the entirety of our existence on this ball in service of white nationalism, which can never be displaced in this country until we reattach ourselves to the narratives of who we were before we came here. Until we regain the momentum of memory, we are going to be the figment of white imagination. We're going to be dribbling basketballs up and down the court in front of all white crowds and cheerleaders. And I'm sorry, not all white crowds and cheerleaders and bands, not all white bands and with 2 or 3 Negroes dropped in to give the illusion of diversity, when the real diversity is the whiteness that allowed them to subject us to being servants for their entertainment and commodities for their profit. This is a challenge that Arnie Bunch has taken on by saying, let us all come together and tell a different story, a more accurate story, or better yet, a convening of all the various stories in which we can find our common humanity. Who rejects that? The clown. Who rejects that? The clown and his court. Who rejects that? All of the people who understand that if we do everybody, if all means all, then we are going to have to abandon the thing that gives my life meaning, which is whiteness. So while they would say diversity, equity, inclusion is sprinkling a little non-whiteness in whiteness and we reject it, their rejection of it reveals the actual fact that whiteness is the real DEI. And that's at this point, DEI going wild because it started wild. It continues wild. And in order to preserve it, it will speak to the basis instincts in the human species. It will speak to the species' basis instinct, which is to fight, which is to kill. Now, does that mean that that's what human beings are hardwired to do? I was walking up the hill going to class, and this was maybe Tuesday, and I saw an old colleague of mine, Norman Sandridge. Norman Sandridge used to be in the classics department at Howard University, then they closed the classics department. The faculty had recommend they keep it open because it was focused on Greece and Rome. So we absolutely reject that. But we wanted to put Egypt in, put all the African languages in, and reimagine classics at Howard. They already started to do some of that work. And we had a plan to do it all together. Then the then president of Howard University, I guess he got up one morning in the shower and had a bright idea to just close the place, thereby rejecting not only the faculty's will, which had been expressed in print, but I don't know what else he was including. I guess he just thought he had a great idea in the shower. I think a lot of times that a lot of stuff that happened to Howard came because of long showers and brilliant ideas that nobody else was consulted on. But the point is this: close the classics department. But of course, you had faculty in the classics department who were tenured, like my friend Norman Sandridge. Norman and I are baseball fans. It's opening day, and we talk about baseball. I'm coming up the hill. I said, "What's that book you have?" He says, "I'm using this in my class." He says, "Do you know the book?" I said, "No, I don't know this book." So I went out and got the book. It's called Humankind, A Hopeful History. Rudolf Bregman, who is European, he's writing in here, and I haven't started reading. Well, I started reading it. I haven't read a lot of it. I just read the first chapter, A New Realism. His whole argument is that he claims to go over 200,000 years of human history to prove that we are hardwired for kindness, geared toward cooperation rather than competition, and more inclined to trust rather than distrust one another. I think that's generally true as a species. So I'm looking forward to reading this book that Professor Sandridge is using. And clearly, what this guy does, Reuter Brigman, who is a historian and a journalist, his books have been translated into 32 languages. Very interesting guy, at least from what I can see. He is going a lot of different places in the world, but then his, at least as I kind of flipped through it to look at it, his references are primarily, and from what I can tell, just about exclusively, once he gets out of the hunter-gatherer stage and human beings who would come together, are Enlightenment or Renaissance. And of course, if you read, I'm gonna read this book in conversation with this book and be like, dude, what you're seeing as a revelation and what you're getting clear credit for seeing, which is human beings cooperate. Guess what? The rest of the world, you have people who understood that. You have cultures that center that. And then the Europe concept that you come out of, there were people who did it as well. But y'all also the authors of Little Red Riding Hood. Be scared of old people and stay out the woods. Hansel and Gretel, old people will eat you up, bake your ass in the oven. You ain't gonna find none of them stories in Africa. So I am always wary of people who want to talk about our common humanity, who use as their illustrations exclusively the intellectual genealogies of Europe. Nah, because I agree with you on the common humanity, but what we're not gonna do is convene a conversation that centers Europe. We're just not going to do it, which is another reason why I got this book about a week and a half ago. I don't know when I'm gonna find time to read it, but I love the concept. It's called The Serpent and the Fire, Poetries of the Americas from Origins to the Present. This is a massive book, edited by Jerome Rothenberg and Javier Tawada. Very interesting. This book is 760 pages, 767 pages with the credits. It's a book of poetry, but the poetry is from every kind of person who ended up on this side of the globe. And it starts before the Europeans come, centuries before. So what they're trying to do is reinterpret the concept of American literature to displace English, to displace French, Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, to go to the indigenous languages, to go to African people, to go to everybody who got drug into this, and to the people who were already here and say, can we reimagine? And it's not historians doing it, it's poets. So the language is very different. So it's very interesting to me to see this, but I'm saying this is more of an attempt to convene a common humanity than this, I think, so far. Let me not judge it. I got to read it first. But from what I can see from his sources, you come out of Europe. Lonnie Bunch, Dr. Bunch, very interestingly, in one of the first, and I reminded him this last time I saw him in February. I said, remember y'all came to Howard and y'all were just planning the museum and you were asking what should be in it and how it should be structured. And you said that the Museum of the American Indian was a challenge for y'all because you didn't want people to come into the new Museum of African American History and Culture and have the experience that they say they're having coming in the Museum of American Indian, which is they don't know where to start. They don't know how they fit in. He said, yeah, we talked about that challenge. But see, the Museum of the American Indian is the Museum of the American Indian, not the Museum of the DEI, United States of America. When you go in the Museum of the American Indian, you know what it is? It is a place where they're talking about the indigenous people of this hemisphere, and they don't start in 1492. They start in 1491 backward. In other words, we're going from as far as there's been humans in this hemisphere to now, and we're not going to center the United States of America. There's a great exhibit on the second floor, third floor of the Museum of the American Indian permanent exhibit called Americans, where they say that word referred to everybody who was already over here, not to the people who came. And then you see them, how they, in this exhibit, are showing how indigenous people were here and then got absorbed into these Western narratives and the ironies that start over and over and over and over again. It's fascinating to me. That's much more in line with this book, The Serpent and the Fire. And so what Lonnie Bunch was saying is, we don't want people to come into the new Museum of African American History and Culture and say, I don't see myself. Where am I? Because you go in the Museum of the American Indian, you know what it's about? It's about the indigenous people of this hemisphere. And you come in there, if you come in your common humanity, you will learn a great deal. But if you come in there as a white person looking for where am I? You ain't in here. When you come in the Museum of African American History and Culture, when they come in, especially as summertime starts and you see the flood of these teenage kids and these little kids with these MAGA caps on their school trips, walking around looking at stuff, you should be in here looking at stuff. Might make you take that hat off. But when you go in there and you go in the basement and you hear, Hey, I can, this is uncomfortable, but it's y'all getting the ass whipping because y'all need to get the ass whipping. Then I go upstairs to the top floor and I'll see some basketball, hear some jazz, and see Michael Jackson, and yeah, it's cool. And go to the little record room. Then I go around the corner and see Jackie Robinson and them, and I feel pretty good. Why? Because this is the black I like. My favorite player is LeBron James. My favorite player is Juju Watkins. I mean, it's cool. Wait, Juju, you transferring to North Carolina A&T? Nigga, I love the blackness as long as I can control it. And so Lonnie Bunch is on the side of the angels. I want everybody to do it now. And on the other end of the spectrum is Greg Carr. We're going to tell it the way it is. And if you want to tell yours, you come in, you tell it with us. What we're not going to do is shrink ourselves to fit your warped white nationalist imagination. That's not what Bunch is doing. Bunch's generosity is a beautiful thing to experience as a human being, a true human being. The clown coming for him, first of all, he can't do it legally. Second of all, because Bunch wasn't appointed by the president, and that board appointed him, and you can't displace him. But secondly, if you try, this is our opportunity to renegotiate the terms and fight back. And the alternative, in fact, this just came out a couple of months ago. Timothy Snyder, y'all know his little book on tyranny. I bought this because I'm a comic book guy and I get my comic books every week. When I was in there and I saw this and I said, when did this come out? And I looked at it and I said, oh, this is interesting. I'll pick this up because there are people who will use this instead of reading the book on tyranny. And, you know, Timothy Snyder, his wife and his friend, they left the United States. They're going to the University of a center in Toronto, University of Toronto, starting in the fall. He wrote that little book on tyranny, which is a little essay. But of course, because we live in a society where people are not reading, they then took the essay, cut and pasted and added some stuff and put it in a graphic novel. So for those of you who are into graphic novels first, if you got children or teenagers who want, this is the book called On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century, Timothy Snyder, illustrated by Nora Krug. This is the graphic edition. So you can get this for, you know, your young people. And he has the 20 things that you should learn, right? Number one, do not obey in advance. That's where we are right now. That's what these law firms, Doug Emhoff, Kamala Harris is the former vice president's husband, his law firm, they shook them down this week. That's all the conversation has been around the lawyers and the law schools. I was talking about it this week and last week over at the Howard Law School. You know, these big firms that are shaking down, the firms that are fighting back, the other firms, the big law firms won't sign on. Do not obey in advance. Tim Snyder is not, do not obey in advance. Wait, you know what? You know, I'm going to Canada. When the leading expert, one of them on tyranny in the world, decides he's leaving, oh, you should pay close attention. Number two, defend institutions. Number three, beware the one-party state. Number four, take responsibility for the face of the world. I'm not going to go through all 20. I'm going to stop at number four. Take responsibility for the face of the world. What does that mean? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Get rid of the language, really. But if you're going to use DEI, I'm going to use it in the way that world history teaches me it should be used the last 500 years, which is whiteness as a diverse, equitable distribution of racial identity that includes all people who were not white until they came into a criminal enterprise based in principle upon the idea that they are not those other people. So I'm not going to use diversity and equity and inclusion to refer to myself. And if you try to force me to, you know what I'm going to say? I'm going to say, fine. I want the stands to look like the basketball court, and I'm not playing anywhere for anybody that doesn't look that way. So either you raise the number of Black people at the University of South Carolina to at least a quarter, and at 18 to 22 over a third, or we going, you know what? I don't even know why we're negotiating. We're going to play for Claflin anyway. We're going to Claflin. Half going to Claflin, half going to South Carolina State, and we ain't got no games, so we got to get on the bus because we just go through the hole in the fence and play each other. And guess what? You can watch or not watch. Why? Because the diversity, equity, inclusion that you talking about, you can stay over there with the Gamecocks in your big arena. We'll play y'all too. We can schedule y'all. You go back to the 1960s and 70s, you started seeing H.B.C.U.s doing some of that stuff. But watch this. You can't get name, image, and likeness because, yeah, my name, image, and likeness goes with me. Ask Shadur Sanders. Ask Travis Hunter. Yeah, they are at Colorado, but they started at Jackson State. And if they had stayed at Jackson State, you think they wouldn't have gotten to the NFL? Better yet, if they had stayed at Jackson State, the person riding the end of the bench who might be a basketball coach, you might have had a couple of diversity hires in terms of white players who didn't play, but most of them would have been Black. And guess what? They'd have got a check too. So it's not about the superstars getting checks. It's about the institutions. And now the money is coming in. Deion Sanders was trying to do that stuff. But of course, you know, I ain't mad at Deion Sanders. He chased the bag, get the bag. It's great. Elevate the game. You go do that, you know, because at the same time, there are people who will stay in those spaces and this thing will flip, because in some ways you're going to strip us of the ability to have to do anything else but that, because you're going to continue to reject Lonnie Bunch's attempt to create an inclusive humanity. And as the more you reject it, they're going to come over to the Carr side. And guess what? The Carr side where they should have been all along. So let me end up with this. There is no alternative except to do what we're doing, because the alternative is not to do anything, not to work, not to build, not to communicate. And the inevitability of the end of the human species, as Henry G. is writing in this book, Decline and Fall of the Human Empire, where he starts, in fact, this is the prologue. He writes in the prologue, well, here, these are the three parts of the book. Part 1, rise. Part 2, fall. Part 3, escape. Part 1, rise. He starts with the human family, then the genus Homo. Then he gets into last among equals, and then the next chapter, last human standing. Part 2, fall. I'm sorry. Chapter 4, last human standing. This is basically part 1. I just summarized in a couple of sentences. You have human beings as the latest species in the world to exchange dominance. To exert dominance. He starts with the dinosaurs, and then before the dinosaurs, all this. But among humans, there are very different types. He says, once that human species stood up on 2 legs and started walking around, bipedalism, and the brain expanded, all this stuff taking place in Africa, and they started walking out of Africa, many different types walked out of Africa. By the time you get Homo sapiens walking out of Africa, they end up getting rid of or absorbing all the other types of humans. He says, when you see one group in the genus absorb all the other groups, in other words, get rid of the, what's a good word? Oh yeah, diversity. Guess what? Professor G says that's the beginning of the end of the species. So it wasn't Homo sapiens emerging. It was when all the other groups got put in. All the other groups that developed got rid of. He says that's when you see the end. He says this on page 6. He says, and so we arrive at the connection between dinosaurs and humans. If you apply this logic of extinction to modern humans, our own species, Homo sapien, we're marked for this extinction. Of course we are. Humans, like dinosaurs, like every other living thing that has ever walked, hopped, or crawled on this planet's face, or has burrowed underneath, or flown above it, or slithered into the ocean depths, are living creatures and cannot claim any special exemption from the rules of the world. On the other hand, Homo sapiens might not be an exception, but it is exceptional nonetheless. And I think it's fair to state this, even though a human is doing the judging. Humans have achieved, in a remarkably short space of time, a dominance over the fates of all other creatures that none other has managed in the entire history of the earth, as far as it is known. They have managed this with an unprecedented mastery over the forces of nature. Humans have penetrated the secrets of atoms to exploit their energy. Goes on. But he says that dominance is triggering what Henry G. says is the extinction mechanism that we were born into. And what is that extinction mechanism? The very earth itself. He says, unless you're talking about an asteroid, which is what killed the dinosaurs, at least what the contributing factor, everything else that we can track has been internal, has been on this ball. And ultimately, the ultimate decider of how long a species stays on this ball is the ball itself. Climate is the ball itself. Environment is the ball itself. And he says what humans have done by exerting this dominance is dared the ball to get rid of us. And guess what? Ain't that what the ball is lining up to do? Now, if you want to prevent that, or at least extend the life of Homo sapiens on this planet, what's your best bet? Your best bet is selfishness. Is creating an artificial notion of, if you weren't born here, we're going to tax you for value because we were born here and you weren't. Tariffs. Are you going to say that the best bet is to sell things to each other that will harm the earth and therefore trigger the earth getting rid of us faster? Like the clown saying this week that emission standards don't mean anything because pollution's not doing anything to the earth. Guess what? The earth's not arguing with you. The earth's just deciding when to wipe you off it. The earth is just deciding when to wipe you off it like you weren't there. Ask the dinosaurs. The point is this. Unless you're going to do that, if you're going to go to Lonnie Bunch direction and say, let us come together, if you're going to go to the Du Bois way and say, let's bring different cultures together to dialogue, to figure out, okay, what do y'all know about environmentalism in the Amazon rainforest? What do y'all Africans know over here in the savannah? What do you Asians know about the steppes and the flatlands? What do you Europeans know about how to negotiate hostile environments that replenish the environment even as you survive it? Let's come together. Here come the white nationalists. Hell no. I'm buying all that territory over there. I'm clearing that off. I'm going to the moon. You know what? Get rid of that guy. Take it however you want to take it, but get rid of that guy because you're getting ready to kill us all. So I'm going to stop here in a second. Yesterday, sitting at the installation of Dean Fairfax with other members of the Black representative class, I'm trying to think a different language, even in English. So instead of saying upper class, or elites, I would say the representative class, meaning what? A bunch of doctors, a bunch of lawyers, a bunch of different people who are sitting there who have been sent into Black educational spaces as representatives of the rest of the communities they come from, that we come from. We're not there for our individual advancement. If we are, you're in the wrong place. You're there. And Roger Fairfax made that point over and over again yesterday. His friend, Kenya McDuffie, my friend too, Councilman McDuffie, who is pushing for African-American studies to be offered in the DC schools in a way, and done a lot of work. He chaired the Equity Commission for the DC City Council. He and his wife were there yesterday. Of course, they grew up with these guys. He grew up with the Fairfaxes. They're all DC people. Dean Fairfax made that point over and over again. His parents were there. His wife, of course, Lisa Fairfax, professor of law at Penn State, University of Pennsylvania, rather, who's teaching a class at Howard this semester for free, as he reminded. He said it's free to the university, but it's costing me. It was this joke. It was a beautiful love story playing out. Can you imagine sitting there with all these Black folk? You got a sitting Supreme Court justice, her former college roommate, and her roommate's husband, and they all went to school together. And I'm sitting there like, this is a beautiful moment because this is Black people, it's Black love, it's our governance formation in our Africana States framework. You see the ways of knowing. The protocol brought his former school, Archbishop Carr, where he went to school. They went to school, brought the choir there, and they sang Total Praise. Well, the Howard University Law School Gospel Choir sang Total Praise. But yeah, the gospel choir, yes, ways of knowing, cultural meaning making, movement and memory. When the Archbishop Carroll high schoolers came in and sang Lift Every Voice and Sing, and we all stood. So it was a governance space, but that governance space was primarily a representative class. Charles Hamilton Houston III was there. Now, I was telling him, hey man, y'all Houston genes are strong, because he looked just like Charles Hamilton Houston to me. The great Jenna Ray McNeil, who wrote the biography of Charles Hamilton Houston, was there. I mean, just pure beautiful thing. But it's the representative class, because right outside that building, there are people who are unhoused on Connecticut Avenue. There are people who are selling Street Sense, the newspaper that is created for the unhoused to make some money so they can, find some way to feed themselves and move through the world until they can move it. But the people in that moot courtroom at Howard Law supposed to represent. We're not elite. No, hell no, we're not elite. I absolutely reject that concept. The elite, what the hell are the elite? You're supposed to be representative. But in that room of representative classes who, we come in a space that in many ways has been protected from the insanity of racism long enough to marshal some of the best of our ways of knowing into a protective governance space. That's what historically Black schools are. But having jailbroken the Black university, that's what we're doing. We understand that that's not going to save us. We are representatives week after week, day after day, month after month in these spaces that are no longer beholden to tuition, that are no longer beholden to trying to aspire to a network saying you're going to represent people when you run stone cold into white nationalism. Like we were talking about that yesterday when Dean Fairfax stood up and said, we have to fight back. I'm saying, I hear the echo of Charlie Houston in this man. And I'm with you, shoulder to shoulder, brother. All the women and men need to be with you. We have to fight back. You cannot accommodate white nationalism. You must do what Cory Booker did, and heard you talking about it this week on the air, Prof. You've got to stand up. And as you stand, other people who want to stand will be emboldened to stand. And it spreads, as Howard Thurman would say, like contagion. Howard Thurman said, religion spreads by contagion. Howard Thurman, the teacher of Martin King, who we heard again 57 years after his assassination, people playing the April 3rd, the night before he passed, his mountaintop speech, where he talks about those connections. And understand that that mountaintop speech was 4 years to the day after Malcolm X gave the first version of the speech we know now as the ballot or the bullet. And it was Malcolm X, 1963. No, 1964. April the 3rd, 1964, in Cleveland. He gives a speech a week later in Detroit, the Ballot of the Bullet, but the first one was in Cleveland on April 3rd, 1964, where Malcolm X says we must put aside our differences of color and class. Black people must come together and unify. And if we do that in the protective spaces, and maybe next week I'll talk about in the Leeway Rooks book, Integrated, finishing it up now, how American schools fail Black children. I talked about it a couple of weeks ago, but I'm gonna come back to that. I think I'm gonna close here in a second. When Cory Booker, over his 25 hours, is pleading for a humanity that we all have, but that we don't develop in a society that emphasizes our inhumanity to each other. He is resisting. He is not giving it up in advance. Like Tim Snyder said, we can't do. We have to think globally and act locally. You know who understands that on the white nationalist side? The man that is at the center of this book right here that I just talked about, Isaac Ardendorf's book, Finish What We Started, Steve Bannon. We got to understand it for humanity. And we got to get out of the lanes we've been put in. So we're going to, I'm going to stop there. We're going to eulogize this brother today, Russell Adams. We're going to talk about him as a founding father of Black studies, as a founding father of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists, NCOPS, one of the founders of Black politics, a principal man, the author of Great Negroes Past and Present back in the 60s. And the reason I work at Howard University, when he recruited me when I was at the National Council of Black Studies 25 years ago this spring. Yeah, 25 years ago, right? In fact, last month, March. Yeah, March 2000 is when he came and got me. So I'm going to pause there and we'll pick up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Someone in the YouTube chat said, I wish we could download your brain because we don't have enough time to read all of the books. And I was like, well, in narrative, we have a whole thing that you can search, a bibliography that can literally, you can ask questions, you can type in a search and find the man's brain. And we're working on an AI version of that as well. That is
African intelligence.
Yeah, African intelligence. So there's that. People were like, what's the difference between narrative and Nubia? Well, narrative is where all of the stuff is, all of the things that you need to read. Like a Howard Thurman, you and I had a discussion about Howard Thurman.
Sure did.
Dorothy Porter Wesley and, Hubert Harrison. And like we have places there that you can go down your own rabbit hole.
That's right.
Nubia is the community where you bring a brick, where you decide which group you're going to be a part of and how you're going to get involved, whether it's politics or gardening or organizing. Thank you, L. Joy Williams, the last one, or whether you want to be a part of, the reggae class, which is actually going to be a narrative, or the math class, or Meta Netcher and Dr. Beatty is going to be teaching Coptic.
He's doing the Coptic. Yeah.
So yeah, that's our convening. It's not YouTube. So if you have a question, that's the wild, wild west. But we're there because Dr. Carr wants to continue to seed and hope that people want to grow.
Yeah, I don't have any. I mean, that's John Henry Clark. I mean, the whole idea that we can't, I couldn't do it.
No, it's beautiful. You were right. And so that's why.
No, not me, us. Us, yeah. In fact, I'm looking now if I could see if we could do this. Let me see if I can find. I'm in the compendium from in class, and like I say, don't worry about what's that? My brain is like everybody else's brain.
It's not.
No, by that I mean that we're in dialogue. It may not seem that way. I don't believe. I tell the kids all the time, if I'm late to class, y'all start without me because I do not believe in show-stopping monkeys. You say one monkey don't stop, don't show. No, that ain't true. I don't believe in show-stopping monkeys. We go.
Yeah, but even that, your brain is a sum total of all of these books that you have put in, read, all of the, so it's not that you just woke up smart.
No.
You might have been born smart, But what is smart? What is an IQ?
Right.
The capacity to learn.
That's
And
true.
you know, as I experienced myself recently, that it's a conditioning. Reading is a habit. It's something that you can absolutely let atrophy, like any muscle in your body, if you're not working it. So
That's
it's
right.
your responsibility to work this muscle.
That's true. It's true. So those of you if you have the narrative, if you're subscribing to narrative and you go through, or even if you comb through, because a lot of once we moved over here to narrative, so there, you know, you have it here in terms of what we do, and there's also a lot of all our, you know, early years, first years, most of our years are on with your YouTube channel, with the Karen Hunter YouTube channel.
Yeah, because we didn't have Nubia. So I think it hasn't been 5 years, because we started this in 2021 in March.
Nubia.
What? All right. So the pandemic happened in 2020, right? March of
2020, right?
Right. We didn't have any of this because, you know, I was just meeting you in November.
That's right.
And then we were in lockdown, and I was like, "Can I press record?" And I was like, "Where can we put this?" Okay.
2020.
That was 2020.
Yeah. You just said it yourself.
All right.
Isn't that something? It was 5, right? Because 2021 Nubia and narrative. But 2020 is when
it was March.
Yeah.
Okay. So I didn't think that I jumped on it that quickly.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. You're talking about the genius. There it is. Oh, by the way, I just looked at the compendium. Howard Thurman, 26, 46, 56, 70, 110. So y'all can go back and look at the recording. I ain't gonna repeat myself. Those are some of the
in class with Carr recordings, but you and I did a whole Howard Thurman discussion.
We sure did.
Inside
narrative. Yeah, that's exactly right.
And Souls of Black Folk, which which has, even on the bookshelf, you and I have had like an introduction to these books that may be public domain, but we had a discussion about it before. So there's a lot of work that people can do on their own.
That's right. A lot of it. And so many people. Yes, absolutely. Oh, by the way, El Joy, congratulations. Yes. You know, in the passing of our great elder Hazel, that was a natural progression. Yeah. So now she's running the statewide NAACP, right?
54 branches.
Come on now.
Okay. I'm so proud of her, but more importantly, I'm so happy to be that she's been in our community.
No question.
I knew she brought Larry to us, if I'm remembering, because it was L. Joy Williams, part of Sunday Civics.
Yes.
Brought Larry Daniel Favors into my studio, and I remember it like it was yesterday. So the connections of the work that people have been doing under the radar.
Oh, well, no question. Well, that's where the roots of a plan are. People think it's just that you answering the question you raised. You knew the answer. You grow, the roots are there. Yeah. Love you. Let me go get our elder together, because I know these elders about to show up. We're gonna live stream. So I'll put it in Nubia, and in fact, let me see if I have it here. I know I do. Let me see. Let me put it here so that while we're still live, just another 10 seconds. I think I cut it already. Yep, there it is. So I just put it in Nubia. If y'all want to tune in, it starts at we'll start at 2 p.m. Hold on, let me put over here in the YouTube join. And the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, it's there too. Yeah, we wanted to do that. His son, Russell Lowell, you know, his widow. I say widow. Ain't nobody widowed. Everybody is here. So Dr. Billingsley's gonna speak, and Edward Miller, of course, Miss Joyce Rose, who was the senior member of our department. She was an administrative assistant who was there, who was our left and right arms for decades. She came before Dr. Adams did. So anyway, love you.
Love you too.
I see you all Monday night.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And for people who are like trying to get into Nubia, you can only get into Nubia through narrative. We were very intentional about creating a space that required something of you. So when we say bring a brick, that means you have to come in through the knowledge. You have to have a narrative subscription. So you could download the app, but the app itself will not just give you entree. You have to come in through Nubia. So you can come, through narrative, narrative.com, join Nubia, or community.narrative.com, which is actually Nubia is another way to join. But I just want to say thank you to everyone, and we'll see you on Monday, office hours. Some of you I'll see on the Karen Hunter Show later.